Reflected in the mirror was a grotesque, demonic face, its eyes hollow with malice, staring directly at him. Dayo's hands trembled on the steering wheel, his breath catching in his throat. Mercy, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Behind you. Mercy, sensing the urgency in his tone, turned slowly. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw the hideous, demon-like figure that seemed to materialize in the back seat. Both screamed in unison, a primal sound born of pure fear. In a panic, Dayo slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. Without a second thought, both flung their doors open and fled into the night, not daring to look back. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them, the sounds of their own heavy breathing and the distant echo of their car alarm filling the air. The streets were empty, the silence amplifying their fear as they kept running, not knowing if the demon was in pursuit or if it was just a manifestation of the curse that had latched onto them since that fateful night at the graveyard. Gasping for air, they finally stopped, hands on their knees, trying to make sense of what had just happened.
Well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you need to subscribe.
The atmosphere at Dayo's apartment was thick with tension and anticipation as Emeka recounted his harrowing experience to his friend. The dim light from the living room lamp cast long shadows across the walls, adding a dramatic effect to the chilling tale. So, there I was, thinking she was just another passenger, and then she transformed into, I don't even know, man, something out of a nightmare, Emeka explained, his voice still shaking from the memory. Dayo, who had been listening intently, raised an eyebrow in disbelief. Hold on, back up a second. You picked up a lady at that time of night? Aside from your girlfriend, Joy, I mean. What were you thinking? Emeka shifted uncomfortably on the couch. The judgment in Dayo's tone was palpable, and he knew what was coming. Look, I saw this fine lady by the roadside, all right? I thought maybe this could turn into a one-night stand or something, he confessed, avoiding Dayo's gaze. Dayo burst into laughter, shaking his head. Your womanizing is going to get you in trouble, man. You tried your luck, and it looks like you ended up picking up a witch or something. The room filled with Dayo's laughter, but Emeka didn't share the amusement. His recent scare had left him more rattled than he cared to admit, and Dayo's light-hearted take on it didn't sit well. Before Emeka could respond, a sudden knock on the door cut through the tension. Both men froze, their laughter silenced. Dayo wasn't expecting anyone else tonight. The unexpected visitor at this hour seemed almost ominous, given the context of their conversation. Dayo walked over to the door, his peered through the peephole, his expression turning from confusion to surprise. Turning back to Emeka with a raised eyebrow, he whispered, "It's Mercy and Joy." He opened the door to reveal their two girlfriends standing in the hallway. Mercy's face was etched with concern, while Joy had an air of urgency about her. "Hey guys," Joy started, her voice tight with anxiety. "We need to talk. All of us. It's important." Mercy nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Emeka. "We've all been experiencing strange things since that night at the graveyard." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation settled over them. Dayo gestured for Mercy and Joy to come in, and they all gathered around the living room, each person ready to share their piece of the haunting puzzle. As they sat down, Dayo looked around at his friends, his earlier amusement replaced by a solemnity that matched the mood of his companions. "All right, let's get everything out in the open. We need to figure out what we're dealing with and how we can stop it." One by one, they began to share their experiences. Joy talked about feeling followed and seeing apparitions. Mercy described her unshakable feeling of being covered in grave dirt, and Emeka recounted his eerie encounter with the transforming passenger. Dayo listened, his skepticism waning as the stories unfolded. It was clear that something supernatural had latched onto them since their ill-fated visit to the graveyard. The reality of their situation was undeniable, and they needed a plan. The atmosphere in Dayo's living room was charged with a palpable tension as each friend recounted their eerie experiences since their night at the graveyard. As the last of the stories tapered, Mercy turned her gaze toward Dayo, who had been mostly listening. "Dayo, it seems you're the only one not experiencing anything, or are you hiding something from us?" Mercy's voice was tinged with suspicion and concern. Dio shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny of his lover and friend's focused eyes. He hesitated, a frown creasing his brow as he debated his next words. The room held its breath, waiting for his response. Finally, with a sigh, Dio decided to come clean. "All right, there's something I haven't mentioned," Dio admitted, his voice lower than usual. "Remember the night we got back? I was going through the photos from the trip to try and distract myself from everything. But I found something on my camera that I didn't expect." The group leaned in, their earlier fatigue forgotten in the wake of this new revelation. Dio continued. "There were pictures of that night at the graveyard. But the thing is, we never took any photos there. We were all too caught up in the moment, and I definitely didn't take any during, you know." His friends exchanged nervous glances, the implications of his words slowly dawning on them. Emeka was the first to break the silence, his voice tense. "You mean to say there are photos of us at the graveyard that none of us took?" Dio nodded grimly. "Yes, and they're not just regular photos, they're disturbing. It's like someone or something was there with us, watching, and decided to document that moment." Joy covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with fear, while Mercy felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The room suddenly felt colder, as if a chill wind had swept through it, carrying with it the echoes of their past misdeeds. "But babe, why didn't you tell us earlier? This could have been important." Mercy's voice was a mix of anger and fear. Dio looked down, ashamed. I thought it would just scare us more. I wasn't sure if it was real or if I was losing my mind, but hearing what all of you have gone through, I realize we're dealing with something beyond our understanding." The revelation changed the dynamics of the conversation. What had started as a discussion of individual hauntings had morphed into a collective realization that their actions at the graveyard had invited something into their lives, something that was actively engaging with them. "We need to go back," Joy said quietly, the weight of their situation settling on her shoulders. "Not just for our peace of mind, but to put a stop to whatever we've unleashed." The group agreed, the decision unanimous. The need to return to the graveyard and confront their past actions was clearer than ever. They had to find a way to appease whatever spirits they had disturbed and reclaim their lives from the shadow of the grave. With a plan slowly forming and the stakes higher than ever, they spent the rest of the evening discussing their next steps, the room filled with a new sense of urgency and purpose. As they discussed plans to return to Ejoba, Joy, her anxiety heightened by the revelations, turned abruptly to confront Emeka. "How come there was a strange woman in your car that late? Are you cheating on me, or have you started patronizing prostitutes?" The accusation shot through the tense air like a bolt, her voice a mix of hurt and suspicion. Emeka, taken aback by the sudden shift from supernatural worries to personal accusations, felt a rush of defense rise within him. "How can you say such a thing?" he retorted, his tone a mixture of indignation and shock. "I saw the lady. She was stranded in the middle of nowhere. I just wanted to help her out of danger. Is it now a crime to help the opposite gender?" The room, already charged with the stress of their paranormal ordeal, now crackled with the added tension of personal betrayal and misunderstanding. Dio and Mercy exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the shift in the conversation's tone. Realizing the sensitivity of the situation, Dio gently touched Mercy's arm, signaling that it might be best for them to give Joy and Emeka some space to resolve their issues. They quietly excused themselves, moving to the kitchen under the pretense of needing a drink, leaving Joy and Emeka to their heated discussion. The argument between Joy and Emeka spiraled, each retort and justification building on the last. Emeka, struggling to maintain his innocence, emphasized his good intentions, his voice firm with frustration. "I was just being a good Samaritan. It's late at night. I thought it was the right thing to do." Joy, her emotions fueled by the stress of their supernatural predicament, found it hard to separate her fear from her jealousy. Her voice softened slightly as the initial anger gave way to vulnerability. "I'm just scared, Emeka. Everything that's happening, it's making me paranoid, making me think the worst." As their voices ebbed and flowed, Emeka realized the strain they were all under. He took a deep breath, his next words more measured. "I understand, Joy. I'm sorry if I made you feel insecure. It's just, with everything going on, I guess we're all a bit on edge." The tension slowly began to dissipate as they both took a moment to consider each other's perspectives. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, Joy, her emotions settling and her trust in Emeka returning, apologized. "I'm sorry for accusing you. I guess I let my fear get the best of me." Emeka nodded, accepting her apology with a reassuring smile. "It's okay. We're going through a lot. Let's just focus on fixing this mess with the graveyard, okay?" As Deo and Mercy returned from the kitchen, the couple had managed to find some common ground, their earlier conflict resolved enough to focus back on the group's collective dilemma. With renewed unity, they all sat down again, ready to plan their return to Ejoba, a journey they hoped would put an end to the haunting events that had upended their lives. As they discussed their next steps, Joy introduced a new idea. "I know someone here in the city who might be able to help us," Joy began, catching the attention of the group. "She reads people's destinies with cards. It might sound a bit out there, but at this point I think we should consider all our options." Dio, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "A card reader? Really, Joy? You think that's going to help with whatever this is?" His tone was incredulous, clearly unconvinced by the idea of seeking advice from what he considered just another form of superstition. Emeka, too, was hesitant. His recent frightening experience had left him doubtful of finding help in unscientific methods. "I don't know, Joy. It sounds like a stretch. Are we sure we want to go down that route?" Despite the doubts from Dio and Emeka, Mercy supported Joy's suggestion. "What do we have to lose at this point?" Joy argued, her voice tinged with desperation. "We've tried everything else. Maybe someone with a different perspective could provide us some insight, or at least guide us on what to do next." Seeing Mercy's point and feeling the weight of their unresolved issues, Joy pressed further. "Look, she's not a typical fortune teller or anything. She's helped people before with unusual problems. Maybe she can at least give us some direction." The room fell silent as they each considered the possibility. The idea of visiting a card reader seemed unconventional and outside their normal problem-solving strategies, but the gravity of their situation was pushing them to explore every possible avenue. Finally, Deo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's give it a shot. But I'm only going along with this because nothing else has worked, and I'm tired of all these creepy things happening." "Thank you," Joy said, relief evident in her voice. "Let's set up a time to meet with her tomorrow." They agreed to meet at the card reader's place the following afternoon. The decision was made not out of complete faith in the method, but out of a shared urgency to find a resolution to the dark cloud that had been looming over them since their visit to the graveyard. The next day, as they approached the address Joy had provided, the building appeared nondescript, blending in with the other storefronts on the busy street. The sign above the door simply read, "Destinies Unveiled," with an image of tarot cards displayed in the window. They entered cautiously, greeted by the scent of incense and a dimly lit room filled with books, crystals, and mystical decor that gave the space an otherworldly feel. A woman with a calm demeanor and piercing eyes welcomed them. "Hello," she said, her voice soft yet confident. "Please, sit down." As they took their seats around a small table, the card reader began to shuffle her deck with practiced ease. "Let's see what the cards reveal about the paths you've taken and the shadows you've encountered," she stated, preparing to delve into the unknown. Each friend exchanged glances, a mix of skepticism and hope flickering in their eyes as the session began. They were stepping into unfamiliar territory, guided by their desperation to untangle the supernatural web that had ensnared their lives. The card reader, with her piercing eyes and serene demeanor, began to lay out the tarot cards one by one, her movements deliberate and measured. As she flipped each card, her expression shifted from professional calm to a frown of concern. "What you have done is not just foolish, it's sacrilegious," she admonished them after piecing together their story from the symbols before her. "You have disrespected the dead, and for that there are severe consequences." The group exchanged nervous glances, the gravity of her words weighing heavily on them. She continued, detailing the grim fates that awaited each of them if they did not act swiftly to make amends. To Mercy, she said, You will gradually decay, your body turning to sand as if the earth itself is claiming you piece by piece. Your end will come slowly and painfully. Turning to Dio, her words were even more chilling. You will be eaten up by worms from the inside out. It will start with an itching, a discomfort you cannot escape, marking the beginning of your demise. Emeka received the grimmest prophecy of all. You are already a dead man walking. You have seen the ghost that claims lives. Next time there will be no escape. Finally, she addressed Joy with a sorrowful look. You will endure a tragedy so severe you will wish for death, but death will not come for you quickly. Instead, you will watch as your friends perish, one by one, claimed by the spirit of death. The room was silent. The only sound was the soft crackle of the incense burning. The card reader let the weight of her predictions sink in before she spoke again, her voice softer but still laden with urgency. There is one way to prevent these fates. You must make sacrifices to appease the spirits of the graveyard. It's the only way to avert the doom that hangs over you. Mercy was the first to break the silence, her voice shaky. What kind of sacrifices are we talking about? The spirits demand offerings that are significant, as your disrespect was great, the card reader explained. Each of you must contribute something of personal value, monetary and sentimental. It will cost you no less than 500,000 naira each to gather what is needed for the rituals. Deo balked at the sum, his practical nature wrestling with his fear. That's a lot of money, especially right after our trip. We haven't even recovered from those expenses. Mercy leaned towards Deo, her fingers finding his lap under the table, giving him a sharp pinch, a silent rebuke for his hesitation. She then turned to the card reader with a forced smile, her voice tinged with a hopeful note. "Please pardon him," she said gently, addressing the card reader. "We're all a bit overwhelmed by everything you've told us. Could we have a moment outside to discuss?" The card reader, her eyes softening, nodded understandingly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready," she responded with a calmness that seemed to fill the room with a slightly lighter air. Grateful for the brief respite, Mercy led the way outside, with Dio, Emeka, and Joy following closely behind. The cool night air was a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the room they had just left. They gathered in a small circle, the streetlight above casting long shadows on the ground. "Dio, I know it's a lot of money," Mercy started, her tone serious, "but think about what's at stake here. We don't really have a choice." Dio rubbed his hands together, and then on his face, his frustration evident as he exhaled heavily. "I get that, Mercy, I do, but 500K each, that's not small money. And what if this doesn't even work? What if it's all just, I don't know, nonsense?" Emeka chimed in, his voice steady. "I'm with Mercy on this, Dio. I think we're past the point of skepticism. After everything we've seen and experienced, there's something real and dangerous tied to what we did, and this might be our only shot at fixing it." Joy, usually the quieter one, added her thoughts. "I don't like it either, Dio. But I'm more scared of what happens if we don't do this. I mean, she described our deaths, Dio. That's not something I can just ignore." The group fell silent, each lost in their thoughts, the gravity of their situation settling in deeper with each passing moment. Dio looked around at his friends, their faces illuminated by the dim light, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "All right," Dio finally conceded, his voice heavy. "Let's do it. But we're in this together, right? All the way." "Absolutely," Mercy affirmed, reaching out to squeeze his hand, a gesture of solidarity. "We'll figure out the financial part. Maybe there are some things we can cut back on or find a way to pool our resources." Relieved but still anxious, they agreed to go back inside and tell the card reader that they would proceed with the sacrifices. The walk back to the door felt longer than before, each step heavy with the knowledge of the commitment they were about to make. Once inside, they informed the card reader of their decision. She nodded, a solemn expression on her face. "Very well," she said. "I will prepare everything needed for the rituals. We must act quickly." As they left her place that night, the reality of their decision weighed heavily on their shoulders, but there was also a faint glimmer of hope that this sacrifice would cleanse their spirits and protect their futures. They were together in this, bound by a shared fate, and that unity gave them the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The night air was cool and slightly damp as Deo and Mercy said their goodbyes to Emeka and Joy, each couple heading in different directions. The weight of their impending sacrifices hung over them like a dark cloud, but there was an unspoken comfort in knowing they weren't facing the darkness alone. As Deo drove, the quiet hum of the car engine was the only sound accompanying their somber mood. Mercy gazed out the window, her mind replaying the card reader's ominous words. A sense of regret washed over her. "I wish we hadn't done that dare, babe. Life would just be normal now," she lamented, her voice soft, tinged with nostalgia for their carefree days. As she spoke, she began to itch her neck unconsciously, her movements subtle yet persistent. Dio, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hand reaching down to scratch his private area discreetly. "Ah, young, wild, and reckless," Dio mused aloud, trying to lighten the mood despite the growing itch. "But really, whose grave did we even end up on? That person must really be wicked. I mean, it was just sex. Why take it so seriously?" He chuckled weakly, scratching again. "Yeah," Mercy agreed, half-heartedly smiling at Dio's attempt at humor. "It seems like such a small thing to have caused all this." Dio's thoughts then drifted to their friends. "Emeka and Joy are yet to fulfill their end of the bargain. At least, if I'm gonna die, let me die 500K richer," he joked darkly, scratching yet again, more intensely this time. Mercy, observing his frequent itching, grew concerned. "Dio, why are you itching so often? Are you okay?" Dio paused, his expression confused as he processed her question. "Itching? No, I'm fine. I don't feel like." His words cut off abruptly as his eyes caught something in the rearview mirror. His heart skipped a beat. Reflected in the mirror was a grotesque, demonic face, its eyes hollow with malice, staring directly at him. Dio's hands trembled on the steering wheel, his breath catching in his throat. Mercy, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Behind you." Mercy, sensing the urgency in his tone, turned slowly. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw the hideous, demon-like figure that seemed to materialize in the back seat. Both screamed in unison, a primal sound born of pure fear. In a panic, Dio slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. Without a second thought, both flung their doors open and fled into the night, not daring to look back. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them, the sounds of their own heavy breathing and the distant echo of their car alarm filling the air. The streets were empty, the silence amplifying their fear as they kept running, not knowing if the demon was in pursuit or if it was just a manifestation of the curse that had latched onto them since that fateful night at the graveyard. Gasping for air, they finally stopped, hands on their knees, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The night around them felt alive, each shadow a potential hiding spot for the horrors they had just escaped. "Deo, what was that? What is happening to us?" Mercy's voice trembled, her eyes scanning the darkness. Dio shook his head, his mind racing for answers. Whatever spirits they had angered were not going to let them off easily. Dawn came pretty fast the next day, a heavy blanket of clouds dimming the light of the sun as if to mirror the group's somber mood. Emeka and Joy were the first to arrive at the card reader's place, their car parked a little distance from the entrance. They sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts, the weight of the previous day's revelations pressing down on them. Joy periodically glanced at the street, watching for Dio and Mercy. When she finally spotted them stepping out of a cab, her brow furrowed in confusion. "That's odd," she murmured to Emeka, who followed her gaze. As Dio and Mercy approached, the concern on Joy's face was evident. "Deo, why didn't you drive down?" she asked, as they greeted each other with quick, tense nods. Deo and Mercy exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them before they turned back to their friends. "Guys, you won't believe what happened to us yesterday," Deo began, his voice tinged with a mix of fear and disbelief. Mercy nodded, supporting his lead. Together, they recounted the chilling encounter with the demonic apparition in the car, how they had fled in terror, and the unresolved fear that lingered since. Emeka, listening intently, found an uneasy humor in their tale. "That's exactly how I experienced mine," he chimed in, trying to lighten the mood. "But the difference is I'm still driving the car." He let out a loud laugh, hoping to ease the tension. However, his joke fell flat, the gravity of their situation leaving little room for laughter. The group shared a moment of strained silence before Mercy, looking more determined, steered the conversation back to their purpose. "Let's find a permanent solution," she declared, leading them towards the card reader's door. As Joy knocked, they braced themselves for the session ahead, each carrying a mix of fear and resolve. But when the door swung open, they were met not by the familiar, calm presence of the card reader, but by a scene that none of them had expected. The room was in disarray, books and cards strewn about, candles knocked over, and in the center of it all lay the card reader, motionless on the floor. Shock gripped them as they rushed inside, Deo and Emeka moving to check on her. "Is she?" Joy couldn't finish her sentence, her voice choked with fear. Deo, kneeling beside the card reader, checked for a pulse. After a tense moment, he let out a heavy breath. "She's alive, just unconscious," he confirmed, his relief palpable yet his worry not entirely assured. As Emeka called for emergency services, Mercy and Joy began to tidy the room, trying to piece together what might have happened. The chaotic scene suggested a struggle or perhaps a sudden ailment. Questions swirled among them, the uncertainty of the situation adding another layer of anxiety to their already burdened hearts. Once the paramedics arrived and took over, the group stepped outside, the fresh air doing little to clear the heaviness that hung over them. The urgency of the situation escalated rapidly as the paramedics prepared to transport the unconscious card reader to the hospital. As they maneuvered her on a stretcher through the cluttered, candle-lit room, her hand suddenly reached out, grasping Joy's with surprising strength. Joy, caught off guard, leaned in as the card reader's eyes flickered open, her gaze intense and clear despite her weakened state. "Run for your life," she rasped, her voice urgent yet barely audible above the commotion. "Go back to where it all began if you want to live." With those cryptic words, her grip loosened, and her eyes closed once more, slipping back into unconsciousness as the paramedics quickly whisked her away. Stunned, Joy stood frozen for a moment, the card reader's warning echoing in her mind. As the ambulance drove off, the gravity of the situation settled heavily upon the group. They gathered around Joy, their faces etched with concern and fear. "What did she say to you?" Emeka asked, his voice tense with worry. Joy repeated the card reader's ominous advice. "Run for your life and go back to where it all began if you want to live." The words hung in the air, stark and foreboding. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, each processing the dire implication of those words. It was Mercy who broke the silence, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "She's telling us to go back to the graveyard. That's where this nightmare started. Maybe that's where we need to go to end it. We may not have a choice." Deo responded grimly. "It's clear now that ignoring this isn't an option. If we want any chance of getting our lives back, we need to confront this head-on." Joy, still shaken by the physical contact and the intensity of the card reader's warning, nodded in agreement. She was so urgent about it. "I think she knows more about what's at stake for us, more than she could explain before, whatever happened to her." The sun filtered softly through the curtains of Dayo's apartment, casting long, warm rays. They had spent the morning packing and preparing for their return to Ejoba, each movement heavy with the anticipation of what awaited them. Joy stepped aside to make a crucial phone call. Dialing Palumi's number, she waited with bated breath for the tour guide to pick up. Palumi had been more than just a guide during their last visit. He had become a part of their story, woven into the fabric of their eerie experience at the graveyard. "Hello, Palumi? It's Joy," she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. Palumi's response was immediate and tinged with surprise. "Joy, I didn't expect to hear from you all so soon. Is everything all right? Are you guys coming back to Ejoba?" Joy hesitated, not wanting to divulge too much over the phone but needing to convey the seriousness of their situation. "We are coming back, Palumi. There's a problem. Something from our last visit that we need to resolve. We really need your help." Palumi's tone shifted from casual to concerned. "Of course, Joy. Whatever you need, I'm here. When can I expect you?" "We'll be there by late afternoon. It's kind of urgent," Joy replied. "All right, I'll clear my schedule. Be safe on the road, and call me when you're close," Palumi assured her, his voice steady and comforting. Dio excused himself to the bathroom, a mundane act that soon turned nightmarish. As he tried to relieve himself, he was gripped by a sharp, excruciating pain. Panic surged through him as he struggled, the memory of the card reader's chilling prophecy echoing in his mind. With increasing desperation, he attempted again, only to witness something that froze his blood, an appalling sight of tiny wriggling maggots where there should have been nothing but the usual stream. The shock was too much. Dio screamed, a visceral, terror-filled sound that tore through the apartment. Mercy, alarmed by the sudden outburst, rushed to the bathroom. The door swung open to reveal Dio, pale and trembling, staring down in disbelief and horror at the nightmare unfolding before him. "Oh my God, Dio," Mercy exclaimed, her voice choked with horror. She clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock as she took in the sight of the living maggots. Dio's voice was barely a whisper, his body shaking uncontrollably. "This can't be happening. The card reader," she said. Without another word, Mercy grabbed her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed Emeka's number. The ring seemed to echo ominously in the apartment before Emeka answered, his voice casual and unaware of the chaos on the other end. "Mercy, what's up? We're just packing up now," Emeka began, but Mercy cut him off, her voice urgent and frantic. "Emeka, we need to leave for Ejoba right now. It's Dio. Something terrible has happened. We can't wait any longer." Her words tumbled out in a rush, fueled by a mix of fear and desperation. "What? What happened? Is Dio okay?" Emeka's voice was now laced with concern, the background noise indicating he was already on the move. "It's the curse, Emeka. Just get Joy and come over as fast as you can." "We're leaving immediately," Mercy insisted, glancing back at Dio, who was now slumped against the wall, his face a mask of pain and fear. Emeka agreed without hesitation, the seriousness of her tone galvanizing him into action. "We're on our way. Hang tight." After hanging up, Mercy helped Dio to his feet, supporting him as they made their way to the living room. Dio was barely able to walk, each step a testament to the pain and shock he was enduring. Minutes later, Emeka and Joy arrived, their expressions turning to ones of shock as they saw Dio's condition. Without wasting any more time, they helped him into the car, and the group set off for Ejoba with a sense of urgent purpose. As Emeka's car pulled into the dusty junction of Ejoba, the sight of Palumi waiting anxiously was a stark reminder of the gravity of their return. His face, usually marked by a cheerful disposition, now bore lines of worry and apprehension. The transformation was noticeable as he caught sight of Dio, his condition visibly deteriorating since their last visit. "What happened to him?" Palumi exclaimed, rushing towards the car as Emeka parked. The urgency in his voice mirrored the panic in his actions as he helped the others carry Dio into the nearby apartment they had arranged for their stay. Inside, they gently laid Dio on the bed. His appearance was shocking. He seemed to have aged years in just days, his body frail and his skin pallid, as if his life force was being siphoned away. Joy, with a damp cloth in hand, tenderly dabbed at Dio's forehead, trying to offer whatever comfort she could, though her eyes were brimming with fear. Outside, under the dim light of a street lamp, Emeka and Mercy recounted their tale to Palumi. They spoke of their previous visit, the ill-advised dare at the graveyard, and the series of terrifying events that followed. They detailed the eerie predictions of the card reader and her sudden mysterious ailment that had left them without guidance. As the story unfolded, Palumi's expression grew increasingly grim. The silence that followed their account was heavy, filled with the sounds of the night and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Palumi, deeply rooted in the traditions and spiritual practices of Ejoba, knew the severity of their transgression against the sacred resting places of the dead. "This is bad," Palumi finally spoke, his voice low and serious. "Very bad. You've disturbed something ancient, something that's not easily appeased." But you did the right thing by coming back here. This is where you'll find your answers and hopefully your salvation." Pulumi paused, considering their next steps. Pulumi's concern deepened, prompting him to delve further into the specifics of their fateful night. "Mercy, can you describe the grave you made love on? Anything you remember might help us understand what we're up against," he urged gently, his voice betraying a hint of urgency. Mercy closed her eyes, trying to recall the details of that eerie night under the moonlit sky. It was, isolated from the others, near an old tree. The headstone was more elaborate than the rest, with intricate carvings that looked almost like warnings, she described, her voice faltering as she pictured the scene. Pulumi's expression shifted dramatically as Mercy spoke. His face, usually calm and controlled, was suddenly etched with stark panic. The others noticed the change immediately, their anxiety spiking. "Mormy," he whispered, almost to himself, then turned to face the group, his eyes wide with alarm. "The grave you desecrated belonged to Queen Mormy. She was tagged the Barren Queen. She was known and feared, a powerful queen with a tragic story. Barren in life, she was said to curse those who disturbed her in death." The room grew colder with his words, as if his tale had summoned a chill from the grave itself. Mercy felt a knot tighten in her stomach, realizing the gravity of their mistake. "What do we do, Pulumi?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Pulumi took a moment, collecting his thoughts before responding. "Moremy's spirit is not one to be trifled with. Her curse is powerful and vengeful. This explains the severity of your afflictions. Years ago," Pulumi began, his voice soft but clear, "Queen Mormy was not the vengeful spirit we speak of today. In fact, she was known throughout the kingdom for her kindness and her grace. Life, however, did not return her kindness. She was married young, full of hope and dreams of motherhood. But as the years passed, those dreams turned to despair." He paused, allowing the gravity of Moremy's plight to resonate with his listeners. Every pregnancy she cherished ended in sorrow. None reached term. The community, once her support, turned cold. Her husband, seeking an heir, left her for another woman, one who could give him what Mormy could not. The group listened, rapt and moved by the stark contrast between the benevolent young woman and the tormented spirit they now faced. Later, Pulumi continued, "Mormy was married off to the king, a political move designed to solidify alliances, but even in the royal household, she found no respite. She bore no children, not a daughter, and certainly no son. Among the king's wives, she was marginalized, mocked for her barrenness. The ridicule wasn't confined to the palace. It spread throughout the kingdom, branding her as cursed." His words painted a picture of Moremy's life, one filled with loneliness and ridicule. Night after night she wept, praying to the gods for just one child to call her own. Her pleas, however, fell on deaf ears. As the flickering candles cast eerie shadows on the walls of the dimly lit room, Pulumi's tale of Mormy took a darker turn, illustrating her descent from a figure of grace to one of infamy. Moremy's isolation grew as the palace became a cold harbor of whispers and sidelong glances. Pulumi continued, his voice echoing the solemnity of the tale. Her presence became something to be avoided. Even the children, who once saw her gentle kindness, began to scurry away at her approach, influenced by hushed conversations they barely understood. The air around her thickened with the scent of suspicion, and the sorrow that clung to her robes was met with fear rather than empathy. He paused, allowing the image to settle among his listeners, their faces reflecting the glow of the candles and the depth of the story. Tragedy soon struck the kingdom. The king's heir, a young prince beloved by all, died under mysterious circumstances. Grief turned to dread and then to anger. The court was quick to find a scapegoat for their misfortune, and Mormy, with her barrenness and sorrowful mystique, became the target. The other queens, perhaps out of fear for their own offspring or swayed by the swirling rumors, pointed their finely jeweled fingers at Mormy. They whispered that she was a witch, cursed not only by the gods but also cursing others out of her bitterness. These whispers grew louder, coalescing into a narrative that Mormy was responsible for the child's death and soon other misfortunes that befell the village. Pulumi's voice lowered, imbued with the weight of history and sorrow. In her old age, when she should have been afforded respect and care, Moremi was cast out of the palace. She wandered into exile, her name synonymous with tragedy and malevolence. No one knows for certain if she ever truly practiced the dark arts for which she was accused, or if her only crime was the sadness that life had bestowed upon her. As children continued to disappear, the kingdom's fear solidified into a legend. Moremi, the barren witch, was blamed. It was said she took the lives of the young to avenge her own unfulfilled dreams of motherhood. Thus, her legacy was sealed, not as a queen of grace, but as a spectre of vengeance. The room was silent, save for the gentle crackling of the candle wicks. The story hung heavy in the air, a tapestry of loss and accusation woven through the centuries. Pulumi's voice grew even more solemn as he addressed the group, each member hanging on to his every word amidst the flickering candlelight that seemed to pulse with the gravity of their situation. "You didn't just disrespect her grave," Pulumi continued, his gaze sweeping across the faces before him, ensuring the weight of his words was felt. "What you did is you made a spectacle at the very sight of her eternal rest. It was akin to rubbing the cause of her deepest pain in her face, even in death." He paused, allowing the harsh reality of their actions to sink in. Moremi's life was marked by loss and rejection, her barrenness making her the subject of ridicule and scorn. By choosing her resting place for your dare, you inadvertently invoked all the sorrow and isolation she endured. It's as if you summoned her worst memories to the forefront, mocking her even beyond the veil of death. The room was heavy with regret and a dawning understanding of the spiritual implications of their actions. Pulumi's words were not just a condemnation, but also a call to deeply understand the impact of their actions on a soul that had already suffered so much. Moremi's spirit, tied to the place where she was laid to rest, still carries the scars of her earthly trials. Pulumi explained further. Spirits like hers, especially those who felt immense pain and injustice, cling to the material world because they left it with unresolved anguish. When you trespassed and trivialized her grave, you reopen old wounds. Now, her spirit cries out not just in anger, but in profound pain. The group absorbed this, the reality of their night of folly turning into a sobering lesson on the sanctity of final resting places and the lingering presence of the past. Your actions at the graveyard were more than a mistake. They were a desecration of her memory and her pain, Pulumi said, his tone softening slightly as he saw the genuine remorse on their faces. "First, we need to ensure Dayo's safety. He seems to be the most affected. We must perform a cleansing ritual immediately to stabilize his condition."